My daughter called me from a bathroom at 11 at night in February and asked me if I could come get her. She was 13. She was whispering. She had the water running, which is a thing she had worked out on her own, and I did not think about that until later, and then I could not stop thinking about it. I said, "Are you hurt?" She said no. I said, "Is anybody hurt?" She said no. And then she said, "Dad, there is a man here, and Mom said he was leaving on Sunday, and it is Wednesday." I was in the truck in about 90 seconds. If somebody has ever told you that you were nothing but a check, stay with me. Subscribe before you go any further. I put one of these up every day. Hit like on your way past, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I had been paying $6,000 a month in child support for 9 years. $6,000 a month. On top of that, I paid her school directly, which was $18,000 a year, and I carried her on my medical and dental, and there was a vehicle I paid for that was in her mother's name so that my daughter could be driven places. Over 9 years, I sent that woman about $430,000. I am not saying that number to complain. I never complained about it once, and the reason is coming, and the explanation is the whole reason any of the rest of it happened. My name is Theodore Ravenel, and everybody has called me Teddy since I was 6. I do commercial HVAC. I started as an estimator at 23 for a company in Charlotte that did big mechanical packages, hospitals and data centers and school districts, and I was good at estimating in a way that is hard to explain to people outside the business. Estimating is not adding. Anybody can add. Estimating is knowing which of the 400 lines on a bid is the one that is going to eat you, and I could see it, and I could see it fast. I went out on my own at 31 with 2 trucks and a man named Purcell Devaney who is still with me. The first 4 years nearly finished me. I had 2 trucks and 1 man and a line of credit secured against a house I was renting out, and there was a stretch in 2017 where I did not take a paycheck for 11 weeks. I have 41 employees now. We do about $4 million a year, and we are the company you call when a thing has gone wrong, and the general contractor is already screaming. I am not rich. The number 6,000 makes people assume things, so let me kill that now. I am a man who owns a mechanical contracting business in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I have a mortgage, and there are Februaries where I do not take a paycheck so that 41 other people do. I met Sana Broussard in a parking deck in 2010. Her car would not start and I had cables, and it took about 11 minutes, and she was funny about the whole thing, in a way that I found extraordinary. Nobody is funny in a parking deck at 7 in the evening about their own car not starting. She was 26. She did medical billing for a practice in Ballantyne, and she was sharp about it, and she had a way of describing her coworkers that made you feel like you had met them. She met my mother 4 months in, and the 2 of them were thick as thieves inside of a weekend, which almost never happens with my mother. She came to a job site once, in the 2nd year, because I was going to be there until 9, and she brought food. A data center shell in Huntersville, and I walked her through a mechanical room and explained what everything did, and she asked good questions for about 40 minutes. I have thought about that night more than I have thought about most of the good ones, because she was interested, not performing interest. She wanted to know how a building breathes. We were together 3 years, and we never married. That was not her doing, and it turns out to matter. She brought it up twice, in the 2nd year and again in the 3rd, and both times I said something reasonable sounding about timing. I was 32 years old and building a company, and I did not want to slow down for a wedding, and I told myself we had plenty of time, and I have thought about those 2 conversations more than I have thought about almost anything else. Nadia was born in June of 2012. I was in that room. I cut the cord. There is a photograph of me holding her at about 4 minutes old, and my face in it does not look like my face. I signed an affidavit of parentage before we left that hospital. In North Carolina, you do that at the bedside, and a woman from the hospital brings the form, and both parents sign it in front of a notary, and it goes to vital records and it goes on the birth certificate. I signed it about 6 hours after she was born. Sana signed it too. Theodore Ravenel, father. Remember that piece of paper. Everything at the end of this turns on that piece of paper, and on the fact that I signed it in a hospital room in 2012 without reading one word of it. We split up when Nadia was 2. The end of it was not a fight either. There was a Sunday in 2014 where we sat in a living room for most of an afternoon with a 2-year-old asleep in the next room, and neither of us said anything for long stretches, and at some point she said, "This is not working," and I said, "No." That was the conversation. 2 sentences, and then about 9 minutes of nothing, and then we started working out logistics like two people dissolving a partnership. There was no event. Nobody cheated, as far as I have ever known. We were two people who had a child before we had any business having one, and who ran out of things to say to each other by the time that child could walk. The custody agreement was worked out between two attorneys in about 4 months, and it was not ugly. Primary residential with her mother, every other weekend and one weeknight for me, plus half of the summer, plus alternating holidays. I agreed to that. Nobody imposed it on me. I was 34 years old with a 2-year-old company, and I was on job sites at 6 in the morning, and I sat in a conference room and did the honest arithmetic on what I could actually provide on a Tuesday in October, and the answer was not much. That is the decision, right there. That is the one I would take back if I could take one back, and I have had a long time to think about it, and I am still not certain I was wrong at the time. The support was set at $1,100 a month in 2014. It got recalculated twice. Once in 2017, when we finished a hospital job that changed what my company looked like, and it went to $3,200. And once in 2019, after 2 good years, and it went to $6,000. The 2019 recalculation is the one I would explain to somebody if I had to explain how a man ends up at $6,000 a month. North Carolina has guidelines, and above a certain combined income, the guidelines stop applying and a judge does what the judge thinks is reasonable, and there is a great deal of room in that. My company had 2 good years, and my accountant had structured things a certain way, and the number on a page looked like a number that could support $6,000 a month. Rita told me, in a conference room, that a substantial portion of what showed as income had gone straight back into equipment and payroll, and that we could put an expert on it and probably land at 4. Both times I did not fight it. Both times my attorney, a woman named Retta Pinkney, who I have used for 11 years, told me I had grounds to argue about how much of my income was actually distributable versus retained in the business, and both times I said no. I told her the same thing both times. I said, that is my kid's mother, and that is my kid's house, and I am not going to be a man who lawyers his own daughter's living standard down. I said it, and I meant it, and I am not going to sit here and pretend I was not also a little bit proud of myself for saying it. Now here is the part I have to tell you about, because everything else grows out of it. I was good with Nadia, and I was not present. Those are 2 different things, and it took me 9 years to understand that they are 2 different things. When she was with me, I was excellent. Hear that without hearing an excuse in it. Every other weekend and one weeknight, I was completely there. Phone in a drawer. We had things we did. We had a diner. She learned to ride a bike in my parking lot at the shop, on a Sunday, with Purcell Davini holding the seat because I was too nervous. I need to describe that afternoon properly because it comes back later. She was 5. It was a Sunday in October, and the lot was empty, and I had the bike in the back of the truck, and had been putting it off for 3 weekends. I could not do it. I got about 10 minutes in, and my hands were doing something I did not like, and I called Purcell, who lives 11 minutes from that shop, and that man came in on a Sunday afternoon, in his own time, to run alongside a 5-year-old for 2 hours. I stood by the truck. I could not watch it up close, and when she got it, that little wobble that turns into a line, she went about 60 feet and did not fall, and she turned her head to find me, and I was 40 feet away with my arms folded, and she yelled, "Dad." That is the memory. That is the one that goes through my head at 2 in the morning, and it went through my head in a lawyer's office in January. But that is 48 days a year, plus summer. And everything that happens in a child's life that actually matters happens on the other 300. The school forms went to her mother. The doctor called her mother. The teacher emailed her mother. I got the summary. I got, everything is fine. She is doing well. She needs new cleats. I would ask a question and get an answer, and the answer was always fine, and I took the answer, because taking the answer was easier than the alternative, and because I was in Greensboro on a Wednesday looking at a chiller. I sent $6,000 a month for 9 years, and I never once asked what happened to it. Not once. In 9 years. I did not ask for a receipt. I did not ask for an accounting. And when Retta suggested in 2019 that I request a periodic statement of expenditures, which is a thing you can do, I told her that would be insulting. Here is what I actually was, and it took a 13-year-old whispering in a bathroom to make me see it. I was a man who had bought his way out of the hard part and had convinced himself it was generosity. Sanaa filed in October. A motion to modify child support in Mecklenburg County District Court. She wanted it raised from $6,000 to $9,500 a month. The stated basis was a change in circumstances, increased expenses associated with a child entering adolescence, and an alleged increase in my income. I got the papers on a Thursday, and I sat in my truck in the parking lot of my own shop and read them twice. And what I felt was not anger. This is going to sound strange, and it is the truth. What I felt was a kind of embarrassment on her behalf. Because $9,500 a month is $114,000 a year for one child, whose private school I was already paying separately, whose insurance I already carried. I did not tell my mother about the filing for 2 weeks. She is 73, and she lives in Rock Hill, and she has had Nadia 1 weekend a month since that child could walk, and she has never said one unkind word about Sanaa Broussard in 13 years, which is a discipline I do not have. When I finally told her, she asked one question, which was, "Does Nadia know there is a court thing?" I said I did not think so, and she said, "Then you leave it that way as long as you can." I called Retta Pinkney and I said, "This is not going to work, is it?" And she said, "No, it is not." And then she said, "But Teddy, we have to respond, and responding means discovery, and discovery goes both directions." I said I did not have anything to hide. And Retta Pinkney said, "That is not what I am telling you." I asked her what she was telling me. She said, "I am telling you that when a case opens, everything in it opens. Both sides get the child's records. Both sides get the bank. Nobody controls what comes out of a file once you have opened one, including the person who opened it." She said, "Most people who file a motion have not thought about that." And I said, "Well, I have got nothing to hide." She said, "Teddy, I heard you the first time. I have replayed that phone call about 200 times." She knew something, she did not know what, but 26 years in that building had taught her that a woman who asks for a $9,000 a month number, when $6,000 is already generous, is a woman who needs money for something, and she was already looking for what. I did not know what she meant. I found out in January. Here is what discovery is, for anybody who has not been through it. It means both sides get to demand documents, bank statements, tax returns, employment records. And when the case involves a child, it can include the child's medical records and school records, because both of those are evidence of what the child's expenses and needs actually are. Her attorney demanded 3 years of my business and personal financials, which was expected and which I turned over in full. And Retta demanded, as a matter of routine, the child's complete school and medical records, because if the claim is that Nadia's expenses have increased, then the school and the doctor are where you go to find out. That request went out in November. The school records came back in December, and there was a thing in them that I read 4 times and did not do anything about for 11 days. The school file is about 60 pages, and most of it is nothing. Immunizations, a hearing screening from 3rd grade, 2 teacher comments about how she is a pleasure to have in class. I read it at my kitchen table on a Tuesday night, with a beer I did not finish, going page by page the way I go through a bid, because that is the only way I know how to read anything. Page 41 is the attendance summary. 41 absences and tardies in 1 academic year. Nadia had been late or absent from school 41 times in the fall semester and part of the spring, and I did not know, because the attendance notifications went to the parent listed as primary contact. I called Sanaa about it. That is what I did with that information. I called her on a Tuesday and I asked about it calmly, and she said there had been a stretch where the car had trouble, and a stretch where Nadia was sick, and she said something about a bad flu going around the school. And I said, "Okay, sit in that with me for a second, because I have." I had a document in my hand, in December, that said my child had missed or been late for school 41 times, and I called and asked a question, and accepted an answer, and hung up the phone. That is the 9th year of a man who sends money and asks nothing. The medical records came in the 2nd week of January. Retta called me on a Friday afternoon and asked me to come to her office, and she said it in a voice I had not heard her use in 11 years. I sat down, and she put a single sheet in front of me. It was from an emergency department visit in 2018. Nadia was 6. She had fallen off something at a birthday party and split her chin, and they did a workup, and there was a basic blood panel in it, and on that panel was her blood type, AB. I am type O. I have known that since I was 19 years old and gave blood at a drive at a community college because there was a free t-shirt. Sanaa is type O. That was in the file too, from a prenatal panel in 2012. which was in the records because it is part of the obstetric workup. Two type O parents cannot produce a type AB child. That is not a probability. It is not a likelihood. It is a thing that does not happen, and any nurse in this country can tell you so in about 4 seconds. Retta Pinkney is 58 years old, and she has been doing family law in this county for 26 years, and she did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "Teddy, I want you to sit there and not make any decisions today." I said, "Is there any chance this is wrong?" She said, "There is a very small chance. There are rare situations." She said we could order a test and know inside of a week. And then she said the thing that I have thought about every single day since. She said, "Before you order that test, I need you to understand what happens if it says what we both think it is going to say. Because if you are not her father, you do not have a right to see her. Not a reduced right, not supervised, nothing. That order that gives you every other weekend goes away, and you become a man with no legal relationship to a 13-year-old girl." I sat in that office for a long time. I want to describe what was actually going through my head because I do not think it is what people expect. I was not doing arithmetic on $430,000. That did not enter my head that afternoon, and it has never been the main thing. What I was thinking about was a parking lot behind my shop on a Sunday in 2018, and a 5-year-old on a bicycle with training wheels off for the first time, and Purcell Deviney running alongside holding a seat, and me standing about 40 feet away not able to watch. And I thought, somebody is going to try to tell me that did not happen. I did the test. I did it privately, through a lab in Charlotte, with a cheek swab I took off a cup she left at my house on a Sunday, and I want to say plainly that I have thought about the ethics of that, and I do not have a clean answer. 9 days. I have thought about the swab a great deal. It was a plastic cup with a cartoon on it that has been in my cabinet since she was small, and that she still uses, because it is a thing between us. She left it on the counter on a Sunday afternoon and went out to the truck, and I stood in my kitchen and looked at it for about a minute. There is a version of a man who asks his 13-year-old for a cheek swab and explains why. I could not find a way to do that which did not end with her knowing something I had not decided what to do with yet. So I did it the other way, and it was underhanded, and I would do it again, and both of those are true. 9 days is a long time. I did 4 site walks in those 9 days, and I signed off on a submittal package for a school in Gastonia, and I have no memory of any of it. The result came by email at 4:11 on a Thursday afternoon. There is a portal, and you make a password, and the password requirements are the same as any other website, and I made a password with my daughter's birthday in it, standing in a supply room at my own shop, to open a document that said she was not mine. Probability of paternity, 0%. I did not tell anybody for 11 days, not Rita, not my mother, not Purcell. That is a strange 11 days to describe. I was not in shock. I have talked to people who describe a fog, and I did not have a fog. What I had was a very specific feeling of being in 2 lives at once. There was the one where I was a man estimating a job in Concord, and there was the one where I had a document on my phone, and I could move between them almost at will, and being able to do that frightened me more than the document did. I went to work. I went to a job walk in Concord on a Tuesday, and stood in a mechanical room, and talked about condensate drains for an hour. And on the second weekend, Nadia came to my house. I was frightened of that weekend. I had 11 days to work out how I was going to be in a room with her, and I did not work anything out. She got in the truck on Friday and told me about a girl in her class who had cut her own hair with kitchen scissors, and she told it for about 9 minutes, and by the second stoplight, I had forgotten to be frightened. That is the thing nobody tells you. It did not feel any different. I kept waiting for it to feel different, and it never did, not once, not for a second, and by Saturday afternoon I had stopped checking. We got Mexican food and watched most of a movie, and she fell asleep on the couch at about 10:30, the way she has done since she was 4. And I sat in a chair in my own living room and looked at a 13-year-old asleep under a blanket that has been at my house since she was 2. That is when I made the decision, and I made all of it right there, and nothing that happened afterward changed it. I decided she was mine, not in a sentimental way. I mean, I made a decision, sitting in a chair at 11 at night, that I was not going to give her up, and that whatever I had to do legally to make that stick, I was going to do. There is a phone call I made on that Sunday night that nobody knows about except my mother. I called her at 10:40 at night and asked her a question with no lead-up, which is not how anybody talks to a 73-year-old woman. I said, "Mama, If a person found out that a child was not theirs, what would you think of them if they stayed? There was a pause, and then my mother said, "Teddy, is this about Nadia?" And I said I was asking a question. And she said, "I have had that girl 1 weekend a month since she could walk, and I do not have to know one thing about a test to tell you she is mine, and you can do whatever you want with that." Then she said goodnight and hung up on me, which she has never done before or since. I called Retta on the Monday. I said, "I am not disestablishing anything." She said, "Teddy." I said, "Retta, I am not doing it. I want to know what protects me." And she was quiet for a second, and then she said, "All right, then let me tell you about the affidavit of parentage." Here is what Retta Pinckney explained to me across about 2 hours on a Monday afternoon, and I am going to lay it out because most people have no idea this is how it works. That form I signed in a hospital room 6 hours after Nadia was born is called an affidavit of parentage, and it is not a formality. Once it is filed with vital records, it has the same legal effect as a court order of paternity. In North Carolina, there is a window to rescind it, 60 days, or until a support order is entered, whichever comes first. After that window closes, that document can only be set aside on very narrow grounds. Mine closed in 2012, which means that as far as the law is concerned, I am Nadia Ravenel's father, and I have been continuously since she was 6 hours old, and a blood type on a page from 2018 does not change that by itself. Somebody has to go to a court and ask. And here's the part that decided everything. The person with the strongest claim to ask is the mother, and she could not. Retta explained the reason, and it is a principle courts have been applying for a very long time. A party cannot ask a court for relief when the situation she is complaining about is one she created by her own misconduct. Sana Broussard knew. She had known since 2012. She signed that affidavit standing next to me in a hospital room, knowing, and she accepted 9 years of support on the strength of it. She could not walk into a courtroom in Mecklenburg County and say, "Your Honor, this man is not the father," when the only reason he ever signed anything is that she stood there and let him. Rita said, "If she tries it, we put the affidavit in front of the judge and we ask her one question about 2012, and the case is over in 11 minutes. Then Rita said the thing that changed the whole shape of it. She said, "Teddy, right now you are the legal father with every other weekend. Do you want to stay the legal father with every other weekend, or do you want to be the parent that child lives with?" I said I did not think that was available to me. And she said, "On what you have got today, it is not." Let me stop here for a second, because we are coming to the part I have never laid out for anybody in one piece. If you are still here, do me a favor. Subscribe. I put a new one of these up every single day. Hit the like button on your way past. And tell me this in the comments, because I go back and forth on it. I found out that girl was not mine, and I made a decision in a chair at 11 at night and never revisited it. Was that love, or was that a 41-year-old man who could not stand to lose? I read all of them. Now I have to tell you about February, and about what I did and did not do, because there is a version of this where I come out of it looking a great deal better than I deserve. After that Monday, I had a piece of information in my hand and I did not use it. I did not hire anybody. People ask me about that, and there is an assumption baked into the question. I never hired an investigator. I never followed that woman. I never pulled a credit report. I never asked one person in this city to look into anything, and Retta Pinckney would not have let me if I had wanted to. She told me why, in that same meeting, and she was blunt about it. She said, "If you go build a case against your daughter's mother, then when we walk into that courtroom, you are a man who investigated the household his child lives in, and the judge will spend more time on that than on anything you found." She said, "Do not go looking, just start paying attention." So that is what I did. For about 6 weeks, all I did was pay attention, in the ways a father is entitled to. The school portal took 11 minutes on a phone call. A woman in the front office asked me for my name and my relationship and whether I was on the birth certificate, and I said yes, and she said all right, and she sent me a link. 11 minutes. 9 years. That is the number that stays with me out of the whole thing. Not $430,000. 11 minutes. I asked for the school portal login, which I was entitled to as a parent on the birth certificate, and had never once requested in 9 years. I called the school and asked for the attendance record for the previous 2 years, which took 4 days and cost nothing. I started asking Nadia real questions on our weekends, not interrogating her, asking the questions a present father asks, which I had not been asking, because for 9 years I had been asking her how school was, and accepting good. And what came back was nothing dramatic, and all of it in the same direction. She was tired. Every other Friday, she got to my house and slept until 10 on Saturday, and I had been telling myself for a year that 13-year-olds sleep. She did not want to talk about home. Not in a frightened way. She changed the subject, the way kids change the subject when a topic is boring or complicated, and I had been letting her. And in the last week of January, she said something at a table in a Mexican restaurant that I did not understand until 3 weeks later. She said, "Do you ever have people over on a weeknight?" I said, "Not really." And she said, "That is nice. That is the whole exchange." I said something back about how I go to bed at 9:30 like an old man, and she laughed and we talked about something else. That was the 11th of February. She called me from the bathroom on the 25th. I got there in about 19 minutes, which is a drive that takes 26. I did not go to the door. That was Retta's voice in my head, and it is the only reason I did not, because what I wanted to do was go to that door. I parked at the end of the street, and I called her and said, "Come out the front. Walk to the corner. I am the third car." She came out with a backpack and her school shoes on and no coat in February. It was 41 degrees. She walked to the corner the way a kid walks when she is trying to look like she is not hurrying, and she got in and pulled the door shut quietly instead of slamming it. And that is the detail I cannot get out. A 13-year-old who has worked out that a door makes a noise. She got in and put her seatbelt on and did not cry, and I pulled out of that neighborhood and got about 2 miles and pulled into a gas station and put it in park. And I said, "Tell me all of it." Here is what my 13-year-old told me in a parking lot on a Wednesday night in February. There was a man who had been at the house since around Christmas. He had been at the house before, on and off, for years, but this stretch was longer. He was there in the daytime when she got home from school. There were other people who came by, not a lot, and not often, but enough that she had learned the sound of the front door, and had started staying in her room with the door shut. Her mother had said the man was leaving on Sunday. He had not left on that Sunday, and had not left on the 2 Sundays before it. There had been 4 nights in the last month where she had been in that house by herself overnight, 13 years old. And she said, "I did not want to tell you, because I did not want you to be mad at Mom." That is what a child does, every single time. She sat in the front seat of my truck, and the thing she was worried about was whether I would be angry at her mother. I did not ask her anything for the first 4 or 5 minutes. She talked, and I let her. She had it in an order. She is my kid, and she does things in an order, and she went through it the way I go through a bid, and at one point she stopped and said, "Am I saying too much?" I said, "No, ma'am." Then I asked her one question. I asked whether anybody had ever hurt her, or touched her, or frightened her. She said no, and she said it fast and easy, and she looked right at me. And I believed her then, and I believe her now, and that was the only thing I needed to know that night. I did not take her home. What I did next, and the order I did it in, is the entire reason I have my daughter today. I called the Mecklenburg County Child Protective Services hotline from that gas station parking lot at 11:40 at night, with Nadia sitting in the truck, and I made a report. The hotline is not what people picture. There is no siren in it. A woman answered on the 4th ring and asked me a series of questions in a flat, kind, extremely practiced voice, and it took 11 minutes, and most of it was spelling, names, dates of birth, the address, my relationship to the child, whether the child was safe at that moment. I said, "She is in my truck," and the woman said, "Is she safe at this moment?" And I said yes. I gave her the 4 nights. I gave her the attendance. I told her there was a man in the residence, and that I did not know his full name, which was true, and which is a sentence I said out loud in a gas station parking lot about a person who had been in my daughter's house for 13 years. At the end, she gave me a report number and told me somebody would be in contact within 72 hours. Then I sat there with the engine running, and Nadia said, "Was that the police?" And I said no. I said it was people whose job is to make sure kids are okay. She said, "Am I in trouble?" 13 years old. I said, "No, ma'am. Nobody is in trouble but the grown-ups, and that is how it is supposed to work." Then I drove her to my house and put her in the room that has been hers since she was 2. Then at 7 the next morning I called Retta Pinkney. That order matters. I called the state before I called my lawyer, and Retta told me later that it was the single most important thing I did in the entire case, and that she would have told me to do it in that order, and that almost nobody does. Because the other order, lawyer first, then report, turns you into a man building a custody case. I was not building a case. I was a father who got a phone call from a bathroom. Retta filed an emergency motion for temporary custody at 9:40 that morning. In North Carolina, you can get an ex parte order, meaning without the other side present, if there is evidence of substantial risk of bodily injury or sexual abuse or removal from the state. Retta was honest with me. She said she did not know if we had it. She said what I had was a report of an adult male in the residence, 4 documented nights of a minor left alone, and an attendance record. The hearing on that motion took 9 minutes, and I was not permitted to speak. I sat in the second row while Retcha Pinkney stood up and read from a document, and the judge asked her 3 questions, and one of them was whether a report had been made to the county and when. Retta said, 11:40 the previous night, Your Honor, by my client, before he retained me on this matter. The judge wrote that down. I watched him write it down. That is the moment. Retta told me afterward that she has been in that building for 26 years, and that this is the single thing that separates a father from a man with a strategy, and that judges can tell the difference in about 4 seconds, and can never be talked out of it once they have decided. The judge granted it that afternoon. Temporary emergency custody to me, a hearing set for 10 days out, and that is not usually how it goes. And I have talked to enough people since to know how lucky I was, and that luck was mostly a matter of what CPS did in the following 6 days. The investigation was not mine. This is the difference between what actually happened and what people assume happened. I made 1 phone call. After that, a woman named Delphine Osorio Ray, who works for the county, did her job, and everything that came out because she did it. She did an unannounced home visit within 24 hours. She interviewed Nadia at school, alone, without me present, which is standard. She interviewed Sanaa, and she ran the household, which is a routine step, and which means she checked whether anybody residing in that home had a criminal record. The man had one. He had an open matter in a neighboring county at that moment. I am not going to detail what it was, and I am not going to speculate about it, because I was never a party to that case, and everything I know about it, I know from a 2-line reference in a CPS finding, and from a court date I saw on a public docket. What I will say is what the finding said, which is a matter of record. Delphine Osorio Ray called me on a Thursday afternoon in March to give me the findings, which they do, and which took about 6 minutes. She has a voice like a person reading a weather report, and I have come to understand that it is deliberate and that it is a kindness. Substantiated, improper supervision, and injurious environment. 2 findings. The first one was the 4 overnight incidents. The second one was the household. And Delphine Osorio Ray found one more thing that neither Retta nor I had gone looking for, and it is the thing that ended the case. The man in that house was Nadia's biological father. He had known since she was born. His name is on nothing. He had never paid $1, and had never been asked to, and he had been in and out of that house for 13 years, at birthdays, at a communion, in the background of photographs that are in a box at my mother's house. His name is Dontrell Bissett, and I am going to say it once and then not again. I met him at a birthday party at a trampoline place when Nadia was 7. He was introduced to me as a friend of Sanaa's cousin. He shook my hand and said something about the Panthers, and we talked for maybe 90 seconds. I met him again at her communion, in the back of a church, and he had on a suit. There is a photograph in a box at my mother's house from a cookout in 2018, where he is standing 4 people away from me, and both of us are holding paper plates. I have met him. I have shaken his hand. I could not have told you his last name until it was in a report. That is not the worst part, and I have had a long time to work out what the worst part is. The worst part is that when Delphine Osorio Ray asked Sanaa why she had filed to increase the support, she told her. He told her to. He had been at that house since around Christmas, and he needed money, and he told her the man paying already had more than he needed, and that a judge would give her more if she asked, and that this was how it worked. She filed a motion in October because a man who has never paid $1 for that child told her to file it, and that motion opened discovery, and discovery pulled the medical records, and the medical records had a blood type on them. He handed her the thing that took everything from her, and he did it because he wanted a percentage, and neither of them ever thought about the fact that a court file is a door that swings both ways. He was gone within a week of the CPS finding, not arrested. Gone. He did not respond to anything after that, and there is a default order somewhere in this state, with his name on it, that nobody is ever going to collect, and as far as I know, he has not been in Mecklenburg County since. That is the man. That is who all of it was for. She burned her household and her support order and her daughter's living arrangement on the advice of somebody who was 3 counties away before the first hearing. The custody hearing was in April. It took a day and a half, which is a long time for a custody matter in that building. Sana's attorney tried the paternity issue. I knew it was coming, and Retta knew it was coming, and Retta had told me in February exactly how it would go, and she was right, almost to the word. He raised it in a pretrial motion. The position was that I lacked standing because I was not the biological father, and that the affidavit of parentage had been executed under a mistake of fact, and that the court should set it aside and dismiss my custody claim. I was in that courtroom when he made that argument. That is a strange thing to sit through. A man stood up 11 feet from me and told a judge that I was not that child's father, in a room with about 9 people in it, and my daughter's name was said out loud 4 times in 90 seconds. Nadia was at school. She has never been in that building, and she is never going to be. Rita responded in 4 pages. The first 3 were law. The affidavit has the effect of a judgment. The rescission window closed in 2012. Setting it aside requires fraud, duress, or mutual mistake. The 4th page was 1 paragraph, and it was the whole case. It said that the party asking the court to set aside the affidavit on the grounds of mistake was the same party who created the mistake, who knew the truth at the moment of signing, and who had accepted $430,000 on the strength of it over 9 years. Mutual mistake requires that both parties be mistaken. Only one of us was. The judge denied the motion from the bench and did not take long about it. And then Sanaya's own attorney had a problem, which Rita had predicted in February, and which I did not fully appreciate until I watched it happen in a courtroom. He had just spent a morning arguing that I was not that child's father, and now he had to spend the afternoon arguing that I was an inadequate parent, which meant arguing about my involvement, my schedule, my attentiveness, all of which requires the court to treat me as a parent. You cannot do both in one day in front of the same judge. The custody case itself was not close, and Sims 8. It was not close because of what the county found, not because of anything I did. Sana testified for 1 hour and 10 minutes. That was hard to sit through, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. She was not a monster on that stand. That is what people want, and it is not what happened. She was a 39-year-old woman, in a blazer, answering questions about the worst 4 months of her life, and she cried twice, and both times it looked real to me. Her attorney walked her through the household. She said the man had been staying temporarily. She said there had been a misunderstanding about the dates. She said the overnight incidents had been emergencies, and that Nadia had been checked on by a neighbor, which the county had already established was not accurate. She was asked whether she had ever left the child in an unsafe situation, and she said no. And then Retta stood up and asked her 4 questions. Did you file a motion in October to increase support? Yes. Did anyone advise you to file it? Objection, overruled. Answer, yes. Who? And there was a pause of about 6 seconds, and then she said his name. And the 4th question was that individual residing in the home with your daughter at the time? Yes. Retta sat down. Delphine Osorio-Rey testified for about 50 minutes. She read her findings. Substantiated, improper supervision, injurious environment. She described the home visit. She described the attendance record. She described the 4 overnight incidents in her own flat professional language. Retta asked her 11 questions, and every one of them was about the file, and none of them were about Sana as a person. That was deliberate, and I asked her about it afterward. She said, Teddy, if I make this about what kind of woman she is, then the judge has to decide something he cannot know. If I make it about a document a county employee wrote, he only has to read. There was a day and a half in that courtroom, and then 11 days of waiting, and the 11 days were worse than the day and a half. Nadia was at my house the whole time under the emergency order. She had been there 6 weeks by then. She had a drawer. And every single day of those 11 days I was aware that a man I had never met was going to read a file and decide whether that drawer meant anything. The order came the following week. Primary physical and legal custody to me. Supervised visitation to the mother, at a facility, 2 hours twice a month, with a review at 6 months, and a stated path back to unsupervised time. contingent on compliance with the county's case plan. Child support terminated as of the date of the emergency order, and an order for her to pay support to me, which the court calculated at $391 a month, based on her income at the medical billing practice. I read that order in my truck in the parking deck on 4th Street, and I got to the words primary physical and legal custody, and I put it down on the passenger seat and sat there. Then I picked it up and read the rest of it, because there is always a rest of it. I have never collected $1 of that, and I never will, and I told Retta to leave it in the order anyway, and I will come back to why. I want to tell you about the money, because that part came out during discovery, and it is the piece I still cannot entirely sit with. Rita had subpoenaed 3 years of bank records in November, back when this was still a support case. The pattern was consistent enough that a forensic accountant was not required. My deposit hit on the 1st. Within 72 hours, most of it came out in cash. Over 3 years, about $140,000 left that account, in a way that could not be tied to any household expense, and a good portion of it went out in transfers to an account that turned out to be his. There was a leased vehicle in her name that I did not know existed, in addition to the one I was paying for. And there was one line in 3 years of statements that I keep coming back to, and it is a small one. In November, the same month I got that school file, the same month I called her and asked about 41 absences, and accepted an answer about a bad flu, there was a payment out of that account for $1,100 to a company that stores boxes. A storage unit. She had rented a storage unit in November. I do not know what is in it. Nobody ever asked, because it was not relevant to anything a court was deciding. But a woman who rents a storage unit in November is a woman who has already worked out that something is coming, and she rented it 3 months before her 13-year-old called me from a bathroom, and she was making arrangements while I was on the phone, accepting an answer about the flu. I have thought about that number a great deal, and I have decided that it is not the point, and I am going to tell you what the point is. Delphine Osorio Rey's report contains a paragraph about her interview with Nadia at school, and there is a sentence in it that I read in a lawyer's office in March and had to put down. The child reported that she stopped asking for things around age 11 because requests generally resulted in an argument. That is a caseworker's phrasing. What it means is that my daughter, at 11 years old, in a house I was sending $6,000 a month to, made a decision to stop asking for things because it was not worth what came after. And there is one more line. The child was wearing shoes that appeared too small. When asked, she stated she had not mentioned it. She had been in those shoes since September. I went and got them out of her closet at my house after I read that. They are a pair of gray canvas shoes with a white sole, and they are a size 7.5, and Nadia wears a 9. I stood in a hallway holding a shoe in each hand for a while, and then I put them back exactly where they were, because she had put them there, and it was her closet. She stopped wearing them in April, and I never said one word about it, and neither did she. They are still in there. She came to my house every other weekend for 6 months, in shoes that did not fit, and I did not notice, because I am a man who looks at a mechanical schedule for a living, and I did not look at my own child's feet. I have never talked to Sanaa about the $140,000. Not once. Not in the hallway at the courthouse, not on the phone, not in any of the 4 emails we have exchanged since April about scheduling. There was a moment for it. There was a Tuesday in April in a corridor on the 4th floor where the two of us were about 11 feet apart with nobody else around for about 90 seconds, and I did not say anything, and it was not because I am a better man than that. It is because the only person who would ever have heard about it is a 13-year-old, and she would have heard about it eventually, from somebody, in some version, and she has enough. Sanaa asked to meet in May, not through the lawyers. She texted me and asked if we could talk, and Retta told me not to, and I went anyway, and we sat in a coffee place near Freedom Park for about 40 minutes. She did not apologize. People always ask about that, and the answer is no, she did not. Not that day, and not since. What she did was explain. She told me she had known since before Nadia was born. She told me the affidavit in the hospital was not a decision, that it was 6 hours after a delivery, and a woman put a form in front of her, and she signed it, and she was not thinking about 2012, or 13 years later or anything. I believe that part. She told me the money had gotten away from her. She said it started small, and it was a loan, and then it was another loan, and then it was a thing that happened every month. And she said the sentence that I have thought about more than anything else. Either of us said that afternoon. I asked her one thing in that coffee place, and it was not about the money, and it was not about him. I asked her why she never told me. Not in 2012, any of the 12 years after it. And she said when. She said it flat, not defensively. She said, when was I supposed to? The first year, you were building that company, and I was 28, with a baby. The year we split up, in a mediation room, when you got the raise, when she was 8, and you were the only father she has ever heard of. She said, every year it got more expensive, and I had less of a reason, and more to lose. And I said, so never. And she said, I did not decide never. I just never got to a year where it was cheap. Then she said, I thought I had it under control. Not that she was owed it, not that I could afford it, not that he made her. She thought she could run the man and the money and the timing all at once and come out the other side of it fine, and she believed that right up until a caseworker knocked on her door. That is how ordinary people end up in front of the county, not a plan. Just a person who thinks she has more control over a situation than she has. Then she asked me what I was going to tell Nadia, and I said, nothing. She looked at me for a while and then she said, ever? And I said, that is not a thing I am going to decide today. She said, she is going to find out. I said, probably. And she said, I would rather it come from you than from me. And I said, that is convenient. And it is the only unkind thing I said in 40 minutes, and I am not sorry about it. We have not spoken since except about scheduling. 4 emails in 11 months, all of them about times and dates, all of them polite. That is the truth, and it is still the truth. The first 2 months at my house were not what I expected either. I had a picture in my head of what that would be, and the picture was wrong in both directions. The first week she was extremely polite. That is the part that got me. She asked permission for things. She asked if she could get a glass of water in a house she had been coming to since she was 2. Around week 3, she started leaving things out. Shoes in the hall, a hoodie on the back of a chair. Retta had told me to watch for exactly that, and I did not understand why until it happened. And then I stood in my own hallway looking at a pair of sneakers in the middle of the floor and had to go outside for a minute. Week 5 was the bad one. There was a Wednesday where she would not come out of her room and would not say why, and I sat on the floor in the hall outside that door for about an hour not saying anything, and eventually she opened it and said she was fine and wanted a sandwich. I did not push. I have never once pushed on any of it. I got a therapist involved in April, a woman named Corliss Ingata who works with adolescents, and Nadia has gone every other Thursday since, and I do not ask what happens in there. Nadia has been at my house since the 25th of February. She has the room she has had since she was 2, which is now painted a color I would not have chosen. She started at a new school in August because the drive was not workable, and that was hard for about 5 weeks and then it was not. There is a thing about school that I did not anticipate. I get the emails now, all of them. The attendance notification, the grade portal, the 4 messages a week from the athletics department about a fee for something. The first week I got a notification that she was marked tardy for a first period, and I had a reaction to it that was completely out of proportion, and I sat in my truck outside a job in Matthews reading a notification about a 14-minute lateness like it was a diagnosis. She had missed a bus, that is all it was. I have got the password now. I have got every password. I check that portal more than a reasonable man checks anything, and I know it, and I have not stopped. She sees her mother twice a month at a facility in East Charlotte for 2 hours. Sanaa has attended 11 of the last 15 scheduled visits. I drive her. I sit in the parking lot. I do not go in. The facility is a converted house with a playroom in it that is meant for children a lot younger than 13, and my daughter sits in a room with a foam mat and a bin of blocks for 2 hours twice a month with a woman taking notes. Sanaa brings things. Every time. There was a phase in the summer where it was expensive things, and the facility had to have a conversation with her about it because there are rules. Nadia comes out and gets in the truck and puts her seatbelt on, and about half the time she says it was fine, and about half the time she does not say anything at all. Here is the part I was not prepared for, and it is the thing I would say to any man in this situation who thinks the custody order is the finish line. She does not miss it. She has said so, in her own words, twice. And she said it flatly and without drama, which is what makes it hard to hear. The first time was in April, and it was one sentence. We were in the kitchen on a Tuesday, and she was doing something on her phone at the counter, and out of nowhere she said, Nobody comes in here at 2 in the morning. That is all she said. She said it about my house as a fact, comparing two places, in the tone you would use to say one kitchen gets better light than another. And the second time was in June. She asked me if it was bad that she did not want to go to the visits. 13 years old, sitting at a counter, asking her father whether there was something wrong with her for not wanting to see her mother. I told her no. I told her that she gets to feel however she feels about it, and that nobody, including me, gets a vote on that. And then I said the harder half of it, which is that she still has to go, because that is what the order says, and because at some point down the road she is going to want to have gone. She said okay. Then she said one more thing, and it is the one I was not ready for. She said, "Do you think she is going to get better? Not, do you think she loves me? Not, is she okay? Get better." Like a person talking about somebody with an illness, which is a frame nobody gave her, and which she arrived at on her own at 13 years old. And I told her the truth, which is that I do not know, and that people do sometimes, and that it will not be because of anything Nadia did or did not do either way. And then she went and did homework, and she is quiet for about an hour after every one of those visits, and I have learned not to ask. That is the thing nobody warns you about. I got what I asked for. I have my daughter in my house every single day, and she is carrying a guilt that is completely reasonable, and that I cannot take off her, and I am going to be watching her carry it for a while. There is a version where a man wins custody, and everything after it is wonderful. That is not what happened, and my company is where you can see it. I do not travel now. I had a superintendent named Purcell Divini, who had been with me since 2015, and who I made a partner in June, and I did it because I had to, not because I planned to. I turned down a data center package in Rock Hill in September that was worth about 11% of our annual revenue, because it needed somebody in Rock Hill 4 days a week for 14 months, and that somebody was me. I made that decision in about 4 minutes, which is the part that would have astonished me 2 years ago. Purcell Divini was in the room, and he did not say anything for a while, and then he said, "You sure?" And I said, "I have got a 14-year-old. And he said, "All right then," and he took the folder off the table, and that was the end of it. That man ran alongside a 5-year-old on a bicycle for 2 hours, on his own Sunday, in 2017, because I could not do it. He has never mentioned that day to me once in 8 years, and I have never brought it up either, and in June I gave him 20% of a company, and neither of us said what it was actually for. We will do about 3.4 million this year instead of 4.1. I am not telling you that so anybody feels sorry for me. I am telling you because for 9 years I sent $6,000 a month and told myself that was providing, and it took me until I was 41 years old to find out what providing actually costs, and it turns out that it costs the exact thing I had been unwilling to spend the whole time. It costs Tuesdays. It costs a data center package in Rock Hill. It costs $700,000 of revenue, and a partner I had to make 3 years earlier than I planned to. And I would have told you at 34, in a mediation room, that I could not afford that. I could afford it the whole time. I just never had to find out, because there was a number I could send instead, and the number kept going up, and every time it went up I felt more like a father, and was less of one. The support order against her is still in the file. $391 a month, and I have never enforced it, and there is no wage withholding, and she has never sent $1, and I have never once asked. Retta asked me why I wanted it in the order at all, if I was never going to collect it. I told her the truth. It is because one day my daughter is going to be 25 years old, and she is going to look at that file. People do. She is going to sit down and read all of it, because it is about her, and she is going to find out things about the year she was 13 that I am not going to be the one to tell her. And when she gets to the end of it, I want there to be a line in that order that says her mother was ordered to support her, and a record showing that nobody ever came after her for it. That is the only thing in that whole file I put there for her. I have not told Nadia about the DNA test. I have thought about it constantly for a year, and I have come to something, and I have gone back and forth on whether to say it out loud, and I am going to. The information does nothing for her. Nothing. There is no version of that conversation where a girl walks out of it better than she walked in. It does not change who raised her. It does not change who took her to a diner every other Saturday for 9 years, or who was standing 40 feet away when she got on a bicycle. It does not change one single fact about her life. What it does is answer a question that only I ever had. I wanted her to know because I wanted credit. That is the honest bottom of it. Some part of me wanted my daughter to know that I found out and stayed, and that is a thing I would be doing for me, wrapped up in a story about honesty. She may find out anyway. Her mother knows. 20 people know. There is a court file. If she comes to me, I will tell her the whole truth in one sitting and answer every question she has. But I am not going to walk into a room and hand a 14-year-old a document so she can watch my face while she reads it. There is one more thing I have to put in, because leaving it out would make me look better than I am. In the 6 weeks between that Monday in Retta's office and the phone call from the bathroom, I had the DNA result and I had the attendance record and I had a lawyer telling me to pay attention, and I did not go get my daughter. I could have filed in February on the attendance alone. Retta told me later it would probably not have succeeded, and probably is doing a lot of work in that sentence. What I did instead was start asking better questions and wait to see what came back, and while I was doing that, a 13-year-old spent 4 nights alone in a house. I have had a year with that and I have not made it sit right. Everybody I have told about it says the same thing, which is that I did not know, and that is true. And it is also true that I had more information in February than I had ever had in 9 years, and I used it to observe. She had to call me, that is the fact underneath all of it. In the end, the person who did something about it was 13, and she did it from a bathroom with the water running. Here is the thing I would leave you with, and it is not about that woman. For 9 years, I thought the argument was about how much. That was the entire conversation, in my head, and in 2 mediation rooms, and in 3 recalculations. 1,100, 3,200, 6,000, 9,500. And every single one of those numbers was me buying my way out of the thing that actually mattered, and every single one of them made me feel like a good father, and the better the number got, the further away I was. There was a document sitting in a school district database that said my child had missed 41 days, and it had been sitting there for a year, and any parent on that birth certificate could have pulled it in about 4 minutes with a login. I never asked for the login. In 9 years, I was not kept away from that information. Nobody hid it. It was in a portal, with my daughter's name on it, and I did not have the password because I had never wanted the password, because having the password means finding things out, and finding things out means Tuesdays. She called me from a bathroom with the water running because a 13-year-old worked out on her own that she needed the water running. She should not have had to work that out. She should have had a father who noticed in November. I am not going to sit here and tell you the lesson is that money does not matter. It matters. I have watched what happens in a house where it is short, and I would not wish it on anybody. But money is the part you can send from Greensboro. If you got something out of this one, subscribe before you go. That is the one that actually matters. I put a new story up every single day, and the next one is already written. Hit like on the way out. It genuinely helps this reach the people it is for. And in the comments, tell me the honest thing, not the kind one. She is 13, and she does not know, and I have decided not to tell her. Am I protecting my daughter, or am I protecting myself? I read every single one of them. I will see you in the next one.